Hello, this is the lecture for chapter 4. This is a fun chapter. It's about ethical guidelines. If we had the opportunity to really chat about this, I really enjoyed those because this is far more nuanced. There's more gray area than in a lot of the other things we've talked about so far. So, this lecture is going to go over historical examples of possibly unethical uh, or totally unethical situations that are well known. If you go on to grad school, especially in psych or related fields, you'll definitely see more of these. There's been a sad amount of unethical or now illegal studies done in the name of science, um, which should have never been done. After that, we're going to talk about the core ethical principles that guide research, and then we'll get into the guidelines directly for psychologists, which comes from the APA. And then we kind of finish with kind of a framework, a thoughtful balance, trying to understand how to do research that builds knowledge but also builds trust. So first, if you've heard of the Tuskegee or Tuskegee, depending on who you're talking to, syphilis study, this study worked mainly on black men in the South. Sadly, it had a lot of problems with it. What it was supposed to be about was a medical study on syphilis. It was directly related to African American men in the 1930s. This one had some serious issues, partly because halfway through the study, so this study is a longitudinal one, meaning it was over time. During that time, cures for syphilis were discovered, and yet the study administrators did not inform the participants that, hey, you have syphilis and we can cure it. Instead, they just kept watching it happen, and syphilis ends up with some really horrible symptoms later on. This was mostly hidden from the public for a long time. Later on, somewhere around like 1997, the Clinton administration made a formal apology about running this study. We're going to talk about some reasons why this study is unethical. It may already feel kind of wrong. We're going to give us some concrete definitions why this study is unethical. A more nuanced one regards the Milgram obedience studies. The picture here shows this individual, this man, being strapped in. Basically, what this study did was it brought people in, and it said, there's a person on the other side of the glass who we are training in some way. Whenever they make a mistake, you need to shock them. And every time they make a mistake, the shock is going to build up. The whole idea was to see how long individuals would obey the study protocol. What ended up happening is people would press the button and someone would be on the other side and be like, ooh, that felt funny. And then they'd make another mistake. And the participant, the person that doesn't know what's going on, would say, okay, I got to press the button again. You press it again. And the person on the other side would be like, ooh, that was uncomfortable. I don't like this. Little beknownst to the individuals in the study, the person on the other side is not actually getting shocked. It's what they call a confederate, someone that's on the inside of the study. And so what they found out is people would just keep going. Even the guy on the other side would scream, and at some point he would just be begging to be let go. Um, and then even get to the point where he just goes silent as if he's passed out or possibly even passed away. And you can start to see if a participant is doing this, they can maybe start to think that maybe I killed somebody, which obviously is not good psychologically. What's crazy about the study is it did show that people, all they needed was an authority figure in the room. Even just the uh, researcher in a lab coat was enough for them to keep going really far. You can look into these studies. They talk about it in the book in more detail, but the idea behind it is we put these people in, these participants in a stressful situation. And they didn't follow through with some things, including debriefing and other issues where these individuals were put at risk psychologically, the participants. So I do have some of the results here. The results of Milgram's studies were surprising in that 65% of participants obeyed the experimenter and shocked learners at the highest levels. And these levels are so high that it would kill an individual. But after this was found, could the procedures have been adjusted in some way to minimize the participants' anxiety? These participants, if you read about it, were stressed. They were just, some of them were crying, but they felt like they had to continue. They hated it. They hated that the other person was screaming. It made them really anxious. So as you're thinking about these studies, not just thinking, oh, well, that's unethical, but think about how it could be improved. These studies did help us gain information, but could we have improved them so that it was not so risky for the participants? So while you're kind of having that in the background, I'm going to give you some core ethical principles. The Belmont Report gives us some principles and applications to guide ethical decision making. The first one is the principle of respect for persons. This is where the research participants should be free to decide for themselves whether they'd like to participate in a study. That means they're entitled to an informed consent. An informed consent basically says, this is the risks and rewards that come from participating in this study. It's designed to be very transparent so an individual can make a decision. It also, this idea, the principle of respect for persons, it includes the fact that certain groups of people are less autonomous and are entitled to special protection. So children, people with cognitive disabilities, prisoners, things like that that can't really say no or have the ability to understand the risks involved, they are given extra protections. The next one, the principle of beneficence. Beneficence is basically the idea of doing good. So this means that we should maximize the good and minimize the bad that happens to participants. If there's a way to remove some of the bad things, we want to do that. If there are things that we can do to increase the benefits to the participants, we should do that as well. And then the last one is the principle of justice. This principle looks at the balance between those who participate in research and those who benefit from it. So who bears the risk of the research and who reaps the benefits? If there's certain people that benefit and certain people that have all the risk, and those are totally separate, then we probably need to rethink it. So with these in mind, think about what the syphilis study means. So first, the principle of respect for persons. This one, I don't have a whole lot of information about whether or not there was informed consent given to them. There definitely wasn't in the same form that we require today. But the two, beneficence and justice, are really important. So, in terms of beneficence, could there have been a way? Well, first of all, was this principle violated in the syphilis study? Was it violated in the Milgram study? So I would say yes. So if you're thinking about beneficence, that means we're doing good to them. In the syphilis study, we didn't. We specifically didn't provide them with a good that did exist, which included medicine. Instead, we wanted to see it play out, see what happened, which goes into the next principle, the justice principle, where could we have adjusted this so that the individuals that would get the benefit also were the same that were at risk. Another way of thinking about that is the individuals in the syphilis study were not going to get any benefits from the study. The information that they learned from this study was not going to benefit them because the study was allowing them to digress in syphilis without providing them a cure or any way out. So the people that had all the risk were not the same people that were also going to receive benefit. So when you're reading the studies, especially for your literature review, which is due this week, be thinking about, did they violate any of these principles? In general, you're going to find that it's not very common that people are violating these now. In the past, there have been studies that do. It's good to keep these in mind as you're thinking about these studies. So when it comes to psychologists, for us, the APA has actually released ethical principles and guidelines. So you can actually go to the American Psychological Association's website and access these guidelines. A quick summary of it is it's basically Belmont plus 2. So APA has these 5 general principles that they work from. So these are the Belmont ones right here. So you have beneficence, justice, and respect for persons. The APA does beneficence and non-malfeasance. So this idea is treat people in ways that benefit them and do not cause suffering. In addition to that, only conduct research that will benefit society. If it's not going to benefit society, it's not worth doing. One that's not really tied to the Belmont report is fidelity and responsibility. This one implies that you need to establish relationships of trust, accept responsibility for professional behavior and research, teaching whatever you do in psychology. Here, we're specifically talking about research. Integrity is the next one. So strive to be accurate, truthful, and honest in your role as a researcher or any of the others. So you want to be transparent and honest with the individuals you're working with. Justice. This is the same idea as the Belmont report. Strive to treat all groups of people fairly. Sample research participants from the same populations that will benefit from the research. And be aware of your own biases. These can be really hard to see, but be open to the fact that you are biased. We're all biased in some way. And if we're open to it, we can find ways to avoid these biases. When we get into more research design, there are ways that we can reduce biases in our research so that the individuals participating are also the same ones. This is, in my mind, one of the most important to really let it sink in, is recognize that people are autonomous. You should protect their rights, including their right to privacy, the right to give consent, the right to have participation treated confidentially. There's also going to be some populations that may be less able to give consent, and you need to keep that in mind. We just need to remember that people are people. You would want, it's the golden rule, essentially. Treat others the way that you would want to be treated. If you would be okay undergoing a study, then that's probably a good start. But just because you're okay with it doesn't mean that everyone else will be. So keep that in mind. We want to respect other people's rights. And so they should have the ability to get out of a study at any point that they want to. And they should understand the risks and benefits involved. So there's a few specific standards for research that the APA provides. The standard 8 is specific to research. If you go into grad school, you'll probably take a class that's specific about this. So briefly, I'm going to go through each of these just so you have an idea of what they are. Again, these are in the book if you want to get into them more. So the first one is the Institutional Review Boards, or IRBs. This essentially, these boards are responsible for making sure research using humans as subjects or as participants is conducted ethically. Here at Utah State, we have an IRB. And to do any type of study with human subjects, we need to fill out a proposal to the IRB so that they can review it and either approve it or ask for changes to our study to make it more ethical. This next one, standard 8.02, informed consent. We talked a little bit about this, but the informed consent needs an explanation of the study, and it must provide in a written format where before a participant actually agrees to the study. It has to be before they're even in it. In general, the participant should sign 2 forms, one that they keep and one the researcher keeps. So you have an assignment called informed consent. That'll be later on down the road. Keep that in mind. You're going to create an informed consent for the proposal that you're developing. So deception. This one's an interesting one. So there are 2 types of deception: omission, where you withhold details of the study from participants, and commission, where you actually lied to the participants. There are cases where this is okay to do because the study requires it. However, when there's any deception, you need to do the next thing, debriefing. So when researchers use deception, they must debrief participants following their participation. So debriefing essentially is where you verbally let the participant know what the study was actually about. And it has to say why you deceived them in the first place. Why did you have to do that? They deserve to know. This is a careful place, so when you're doing this, if you need to do this, it's something to confer with the IRB to know how to do it best. So research misconduct. There's a couple ways that researchers can do some things really poorly. They kind of fall into 2 areas for the most part when it comes to actually the analyses and reporting. It's data fabrication or data falsification. So it's either they totally make up the data or they change the data to tell the story that they want it to tell. So both of those are unethical. Making the data say what you want it to say instead of what it just says by itself is unethical. You guys already signed a plagiarism form to say that you wouldn't plagiarize. Hopefully you've understood what plagiarism means, but in general, it's representing the words or ideas of others as your own. So you copy ideas or things from a website or a book or a study without giving proper credit or citation. So remember, plagiarism carries with it some serious consequences here at Utah State. So don't push it. It gets out of my hands really fast. I have to report it. So please don't plagiarize. When you are writing up things, make sure you cite and use your own words as much as possible. If you understand something well, you can put it in your own words. If you feel like you can't put it in your own words, you might need to read it more to understand it better. All right, the last thing that we're going to go over is animal research. This one's a little bit unique in terms of what can be done and who to work through. Not a whole lot of us use animals in our research. However, some of the behavioral analysts here at Utah State do. They do rats and pigeon, and I think they've even done some crow research. So when it comes to animal research, another example could be like primates. We've talked about a study like that. When you do this, you need to make sure the animals are treated well and protected from suffering. So there's a lot more room for movement with animal research than with human research. So animal care guidelines basically rely on the 3 R's. So 1, replacement. So find alternatives to using animals when possible. So like a computer simulation. So replacement's the first R. Second, refinement. How could research procedures and aspects of animal care be altered to reduce animal distress? So can you refine the study to make it so the animal is more comfortable? And then the third, reduction. Use the fewest number of animals possible. So you don't want to get a huge sample just because you can. You only want to get as much as you absolutely need to understand the phenomena. So one of the issues when we're talking about animal research is that the majority of students and psychologists support the use of animals in research overall, but some students express concerns about whether the animals are treated humanely. It's definitely a valid concern, and if you're one of these, that is totally reasonable. There's a lot of ideas that animals should be treated just like humans. They should have the same rights, the same care, the same beneficence, the same justice. The 3 arguments by animal researchers to defend their use of animal participants, it's something to consider. 1 is animal research has resulted in many benefits to both humans and animals. 2, researchers are sensitive to animals' well-being. In my experience, the ones working with these animals do everything they can to try to reduce the issues faced by these animals, the suffering. And 3, researchers have reduced the number of animals used in research. So we're finding ways to analyze data and get power from data and information without using as many animals. So keep those in mind. Animals do have rights, and it's laid out here in APA. So hopefully, as we've been talking about this, it has become clear that this is not easy. It's a very nuanced area. Ethics, there's not cut and dry, this is good, this is bad. We have guiding principles, and we need to use those to try to balance the priorities we have from our research. If we use those principles, we're probably going to go in the right direction. Overall, the idea is we need to weigh the potential harm to human or animal participants against what the knowledge gained from the research will actually contribute to society. So something extremely important, maybe a study on a potential cure for cancer, is worth more potential harm to the participants than, say, something else that won't have as much of an impact. So keep this in mind as we're moving forward. Everything you do, you want to keep in this ethical framework. When you're proposing your study, you're going to want to make sure that you're abiding by the 5 principles that APA requires. And some of that will come in that assignment for informed consent, but it'll also be something you'll have to write about in your methods section when we get to that. So keep these things in mind. That is it for this chapter. If you're really interested in ethics, there's a lot of fun stuff to read into regarding ethical studies and psychology. You can Google it. There's several to look at and see how much you agree with it. One of them is the conversion therapy with LGBTQ individuals, trying to turn them straight. That's a hot topic right now. That's one that you can look into, see what's been done, see what things seem unethical and what stuff seems ethical. And if you do end up doing that, please reach out. Let me know. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. In general, I love this discussion in person, but because of how this class is designed, we won't be able to do that. But if you do have things, please contact me, email me, or post on the question board. I'd love to see your thoughts.